Welcome everyone to the session. I will repeat myself. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we meet, and as the original custodians of Victoria's land and waters, and pay our respects to all elders past, present and future. We would also like to acknowledge their continuing connection to country, their custodianship and the responsibility we all have to act with the same regard for place. I greet you from Boon land, but of course we're all located on various lands across the country and even internationally. I would also like to introduce our team, we're gonna do a bit of a team presentation to you. I will frame the discussion, then I will hand over to Cara, my colleague, then Matt and Jack will take you through the refinement of this competition that we did. Amy Mac will talk to the planning implications in the end, and I'll wrap it up. So Amy Mac, to introduce to you, is a senior planner at the Department of Land, Water and Planning, and she's the manager of Building Better Homes in the Division of Planning Implementation. Cara Wiseman, with the in the what is my top bottom right corner. Cara Wiseman is a senior advisor with us here at the Office of the Victorian Government Architect. Matthew Borg, also senior advisor, and Jack Davies, who was an advisor. My name, as I might have said, Stefan, I'm the associate government architect. So after this slightly stumbly beginning, I would like to start with the presentation. So Future Homes I understand, has had a few mentions throughout the conference. I've had the opportunity to listen in here there, so hopefully I won't be repeating too much for you. Firstly, I would like to just give a bit of connection to how the program came about. So the focus of this program is obviously based on a lot of good work that has gone beforehand, particularly the New South Wales Government Architects and the Queensland Government Architects have run very similar competitions about existing suburbs and how to densify well in existing suburbs, but also the likes of Ahuri, various universities and institutions, the Grattan Institute, many others have contributed to the knowledge base, and many of you will be aware of it, that has built the foundation for what you can see here on the screen, which was a 2018 Victorian Government election commitment to invest into good homes or designs for good apartment buildings in existing suburbs. That then translated into the 2019 budget. And of course, as you can see, it builds on, and if I could ask the next slide, on a very nice Victorian tradition of designing adaptable homes for Victorian cities that are easily made accessible to Victorians at an affordable price, as you can see here, £5 at the time. So that was the founding idea of this program. We then, obviously, next slide, this supports critically the guiding policy, if you like, Plan Melbourne out to 2050. A core of Plan Melbourne is, of course, a 20-minute neighbourhood, building in areas where you have access to the services that everyone should have. So Plan Melbourne is interesting, if I could just go to the next slide. As a lot of the goals of Plan Melbourne, and again, next slide, revolve around building the existing suburbs. So we did a fair bit of analysis, and Cara will take you through this in more detail, but just to give you some numbers, Plan Melbourne foresees that up to about 1 million dwellings are supposed to be built, not in greenfield sites, but in existing suburbs. This is about 65 to 70% of the growth anticipated out to 2050. So how do you do that? The activity centres are very well known, and a lot of development has happened there. A lot of people would say quite sort of mono products, if you like, a lot of apartments, about small apartments, 1 and 2 bedrooms. So not necessarily always the alternatives for families who might find themselves otherwise at the fringe of the city. That's where this program has been established for. I would just like to clarify, next slide please, that what we were trying to tackle is not the entire system of housing here. While we've ambitiously called it Future Homes, we are trying to, with this program, solve a small problem within a problem. So we can't solve finance systems. We cannot even solve land cost necessarily. But what we can solve, or what we can address, is an alternative, what you can see here on this slide, which is business as usual, which takes away a lot of the qualities that suburbs are actually enjoyed for. As you can see in this triangle, often green, that leafy quality of a suburb has been lost. So we have focused very much on, and Cara will take you through this in a second, on existing suburbs, not activity centres, but highly replicable, good, sustainable designs that can support the Plan Melbourne goal, but also a really diverse community to live in. So without much further ado, I will hand over to Cara, my colleague, who will take you all through the ambitions and process of the Future Homes program that addresses what you can see here in the right slide, which is the most typical suburban condition, if you like, and how we had to take a problem that is easy to solve if you have a single house to fit on a quarter-acre block, but becomes slightly more complex when you're trying to fit a three-story apartment building onto amalgamated lots. So over to you, Cara.
Thanks, Stefan. So how did we choose to do this? On the next slide, there's basically three key parts that we're going to talk to today, which is how we're delivering on the Future Homes initiative. The first one is exemplar designs. So these are excellent siteless designs developed for a typical suburban lot. We got these through a two-stage design competition, which I'll go through more in a moment. We've also, alongside that, we've got planning guidance for the delivery of these siteless plans to each suburban site that they'll be built on. Amy will go through this in more detail later on. And then alongside that, the planning implementation tools to deliver that, which includes a new planning provision and a streamlined approval process, which is about government doing what they can to help make these delivered and achievable. So to guide the competition, we developed these 8 objectives for Future Homes, which are the core of what we feel that this program needs to deliver on. So this is about being responsive to need, being livable, good neighbours, affordable and enduring, sustainable and viable, and also adaptable. These objectives form the basis of the competition brief, and then therefore the judging of the competition. And they've also now been translated into the structure of the planning assessment. And that means that what we've ensured that what's important in the designs is maintained and through the entire process. So for the competition, the first step to get the designs, we did a lot of research ahead of that because what the competition is asking for is essentially a siteless design. And so we wanted to make sure we could do that at the biggest scale we could. We landed pretty quickly with some help from Monash and Swinburne that general residential zone was the greatest opportunity in Melbourne context. That's the most common zoning, and that site amalgamation was the key to unlocking opportunities too. So on the next slide, we started then looking at the suburban lots we're dealing with and doing analysis of where the lot sizes and depths and frontages to land the site for the competition, which on the next slide, we landed there. So for the competition brief, we had a 2-lot and a 3-lot amalgamation. So that was pretty central on the next slide to what the brief was asking for, because having 2 lots and 3 lots meant that the design teams could start to demonstrate how the designs could be adaptable, because that was a pretty core tenet of that. Other key parts of the brief was that as a general residential zone, that's a 3-story or 11-metre condition. We're looking to challenge that because this is also about being a good neighbour. And also 35% garden area was mandatory in the designs because that was also really core to having designs that were leafy and green as per the Premier's promise in his election commitment. A key thing was the reduced car parking ratio, which we landed, which was 1-to-1 and no visitor parking. That's for those outside of Victoria. That's less than what you would have in a typical another development like this. And alignment with the residential planning controls, in some places exceeding what's called BADs, the Apartment Design Guidelines for Victoria. And also we built into the brief increased accessibility requirements. So adapted from the livable housing design guidelines at a gold level, which is much higher than what's typically needed on a lot of developments. So that's our competition brief. While we were doing that, we also had the great opportunity to do a student competition with EVA Melbourne, which was opened up to all the universities in Victoria that teach architecture. So we took the same brief, we gave the students a bit more freedom to play with that, and imagine how to live in suburbia into the future. There was a really great range of responses which are available on the EVA website, you can see. And we had the Minister for Housing, Richard Wynne, launch the exhibition of that there in April at Melbourne Uni. So the industry competition, we launched that in March 2020 at the start of Melbourne Design Week. Melbourne went into lockdown a week later, which was interesting for all of us. So that meant that our jury, our international jury that we had developed, became another Zoom meeting for everybody, but that was okay. So we had some really brilliant residential architects on here, as well as excellent expertise in planning and urban design, and also buildability, which is pretty core as well to the assessment. So all that jury assessment was done against those original 8 objectives, but really focusing on the design response, the sustainability and the viability. So for stage 1, from a very strong field, the jury picked 8 shortlisted designs. There was a real range of typological responses to the brief in here for that 3-story apartment building. And all these designs are on our website if anyone wants to have a closer look at these. So from stage 1, the 4 teams developed their concepts into resolved designs. We brought in 3 core consultants at this stage that were really central to what we're trying to do. So and then built in interactive workshops throughout stage 2. So the design teams are getting feedback from these consultants in sustainability, as well as buildability and quantity surveying. So the designs are really developing up informed by all of those consultants through stage 2. So at the end of that, we had another jury session and we selected 4 winners. And Matt and Jack are now going to take you through how these turned into the exemplar designs for the Future Homes Initiative.
Thanks, Cara. So in this next section, Jack and I will talk you through the process and the outcomes and the key focuses in developing the designs, translating them from design competition schemes into real-world exemplar designs. So post the competition, we had to establish some parameters so that everyone was on an equal playing field, and to also ensure that our designs were as adaptable and as applicable as possible across Victorian suburbs. So what we resolved to do was ensure that each exemplar demonstrated a north-south orientation with at-grade parking, as well as a north-south orientation with the basement parking option. And then we also included an east-west orientation with at-grade parking. We also set some targets around net sellable area for the apartments, and that was 1,300 square metres for the at-grade parking options and 1,500 square metres for the basement parking option. So what this meant was we ended up with 4 different exemplar approaches that produced a yield of 13 to 14 apartments for the at-grade parking schemes and 15 to 17 apartments for the basement parking schemes. So during the refinement phase, we also expanded our team of design and technical experts to include a whole range of disciplines noted there on the right of the screen. And they helped us test and enhance the designs as well as evolve our brief from the competition phase. And the way we went about that was by having a series of targeted and collaborative workshops that provided the opportunity to assess the designs against those fundamental principles and performance targets established in our original brief, as well as those good amenity objectives that we really wanted to hone in on. Part of the way we went about that and I suppose to test ourselves was to run a series of different formats of design review. And these were undertaken to evaluate the adaptability in many of the designs, but also the usefulness of the material that we were producing and the soundness of the strategies that we had put forward as part of the implementation process. Critical to this design review phase was a review undertaken by the Deakin University Home Research Hub, where they assessed each of the schemes and provided reports on their child and family friendly nature based on their research base. Next slide, Jack, thanks. So Future Homes is about developing apartments that are great homes and great neighbours. So what that means for us is homes that are healthy, comfortable and attractive. As Siteless Designs, a core focus for us was teasing out how well the spaces worked with each other and the level of amenity that could be afforded across the entire site, indoors and outdoors. The considerations listed here on this site are informed by research undertaken by our team, as well as work that we've undertaken in collaboration with Homes Victoria in the public housing sector and the research mentioned previously from Deakin University. So now Jack and I are going to introduce the final exemplars, which is the end result of about the last 12 months of work. The first scheme on screen is exemplar A, and it consists of 3 key elements that can be flexibly located to suit different sites. The heart of this scheme is the community courtyard located in the centre of the site. There's also a welcoming threshold, which is the main interface with the street, and a strategically located communal stair, which provides for active circulation through the site as well as chance encounters. So architecturally, this scheme is composed of 3 blocks, and the massing provides a corner lot aspect to most apartments, which supports great access to daylight and cross ventilation. The design optimizes opportunities for passive surveillance through activation and a careful consideration of the placement of openings and a habitable facade. And the communal courtyard is protected from the street and provides opportunities for residents to gather, share, and play at different times. So the apartments around the courtyard are separated by 9 metres, and this is to maximise opportunity for sun penetration into the courtyard, as well as to give us a good sense of distance between apartments to minimise overlooking. The main strategy of this scheme focuses on, or the material strategy I should have said, focuses on cost-effective and low maintenance, lightweight options to the upper levels of the building, and more tactile, natural earthy materials to the lower areas and around the courtyard interface. Recycled and locally sourced high-performance materials are proposed to minimise embodied carbon. So the next exemplar scheme is exemplar B. And exemplar B is inspired by the qualities inherent in a typical suburban setting of a single family home, except it's overlaid into a much denser form that prioritises maximising the amenity with strategically generous open spaces, providing abundant and natural light and extending seamless connections out to large open spaces. The siting strategy in this scheme preferences the northern aspect and solar gains to living areas and those outdoor spaces just mentioned. And this is achieved through formation of a north and a south building separated by a large full site width linear central communal garden. So the anatomy of this building aspires to simplicity and rationality, economy through modularity. The apartment designs vary from single level to multi-level, and they really accentuate volumetric play of voids and raised ceilings to create a sense of expansive space, abundant light, and space to grow. The space between the 2 buildings is at a minimum of 6 metres width, which allows that good penetration given the height of the building. And it also allows for a decent amount of space for circulation and opportunities to gather and interact. The forms of the building are deliberately simple, but well proportioned, and they're overlaid with a careful rhythm of openings and pergolas, planters, and varying cladding panels to reduce material waste. The lightweight claddings are composed of fibre cement sheet, galvanised metal, and other colour metals to ensure an affordable and durable outcome, which is typically neutral but offset with accents of colour and timber. I'll now hand over to Jack to introduce the next 2 exemplars.
Thanks, Matt. So exemplar C is by one of our Sydney teams, McGregor Westlake, and it's designed to consolidate its footprint and maximise the surrounding deep soil area and canopy cover and landscaped open space. And they provide a generous front garden that provides a social street edge with a lawn and planting and space for the residents to gather. The continuous perimeter landscape allows each apartment to feel really surrounded by planting and trees and its natural surroundings. And the planning of the driveway and parking spaces allows them to be largely concealed within the footprint of the building, again, referencing that consolidated form. So the consolidated form enables maximum separation from the neighbours, especially to the rear. And all the apartments are single level and have living areas opening northwards onto balconies. A standardised and repeated approach to the windows is adopted, and that references also the kitchen and the bathroom elements. The open air circulation gallery, which you can see in the centre of the plan, creates a clear punctuation in the form, and it has transparent balustrades and minimal materials, encouraging interaction between the residents with spaces to dwell and for bicycle storage. The rear yard is envisaged as an indigenous forest and a landscape corridor to be replicated in neighbouring yards and for future developments to promote an extra level of tree cover, bird habitat and biodiversity. And the ground facades are composed of a more heavyweight masonry with express concrete columns, and the upper levels consist of more factory finished panels selected from a broad range of materials, colours and profiles. And their vertical arrangement is a really unified double order over the ground floor material. So exemplar D by Spiral is another one of our Sydney offices, and that really embraces a modular building arranged in clusters to create a system that slides and stacks in response to the conditions of its site. And this is really supported by an internal compositional logic that can scale up and down from a local site amalgamation to a broader neighbourhood plan. So the building incorporates two modular scales, one that measures 9 by 9 metres and a smaller one, which is 7.5 by 7.5. And they're further broken down into 4 quarters or atoms, which are roughly the size of a habitable room. The arrangement of the modules is informed by preferencing connection to green areas, retention of existing canopy trees, and access to northern light, ventilation and views across the site. The landscape experience of the entry sequence is key, and planting of feature trees at the end of the main entry path creates long views along both axes through the building. The apartments can be rotated and stacked in different configurations with either interlocking spaces or repeated elements, enabling adaptation from a single bedroom up to a 5-bedroom. And the rooms can also be double height, providing clerestory windows. So equally as important to the exemplar designs is what we've called the Building Future Homes document, which Cara referenced earlier, which is a manual that covers the future homes objectives and principles, along with adaptation diagrams designed by the architects. And the intent is to rigorously test the design direction of any adaptations, and with the understanding that there is a limit into what we can anticipate. But in the same manner, there's that flexibility and unpredictability built in to reduce limitations on any undeveloped or evolving ideas. So part 1 covers the objectives and principles that any adaptation would need to achieve, including ideas of livability, being a good neighbour, sustainability, the enduring elements of good design, and also outlining the planning targets required. Whereas part 2 includes a design statement by each of the teams and a potential adaptation scenarios for particular sites. And it illustrates how designers could negotiate a really broad range of design challenges. And then part 3 is really designed to provide key technical information to assist any adaptation and embeds pathways on how to meet the targets of part 1. And some of that information includes accessibility, cost, compliance, fire safety, sustainability, and alternative pathways should any traditional methods prove a barrier. So within part 2, the architects have designed a wide range of guidance drawings and diagrams to assist the adaptations at a number of scales, including neighbourhood integration, I should say, site configuration, and right down to details. And zoning in on some of the example adaptation diagrams, we've got different layout configurations, different mix, different site formats, irregular shapes, and different levels of access, laneways, existing trees. So there's a broad range that's really covered. So transitioning from the stage 2 competition to schematic design, the schemes were assessed by a quantity surveyor and viability consultant, which acted in a role of an interested property developer completing their due diligence. And their task was to interrogate the schemes and test them against a margin of 15 or 20%, which is a really typical profit level for a build-to-sale model delivered at this scale in the areas that Future Homes is designed for. That level of profit is generally achievable in a townhouse-style development, which is a model offering what we see as reduced density and neighbourhood amenity. So the challenge is then to retain the principles of good design, density, quality, and sustainability, and retain commercially attractive returns. So the stage 2 designs will run through a feasibility model that considered land, construction, consultant, and all relevant associated costs, and pitted them against an average value rate for sellable area in each neighbourhood to calculate the necessary profit margins. And the outcomes of that stage 2 model were clear that we needed to reevaluate the yield target for each scheme. And so the teams undertook a really rigorous yield study, and a consistent net sellable area was agreed upon, which Matt mentioned earlier. And in some cases, the yield and apartment uplift was up to 50%. So we explored what a 20% margin might look like architecturally, and it wasn't consistent with the Future Homes principles of good amenity, neighbourhood integration, and caused us to reassess the balance of margin and amenity. And the result was finding a range that was still attractive to a developer in certain suburban areas, noting others are quite difficult to achieve due to a number of reasons, and finance really being one. So we thought it was interesting to drill down into one of the main factors that influence viability, which is car parking. The schemes needed to ensure a 1-to-1 parking ratio, which is the concession rate allowed by the brief. And with the uplift in apartment numbers and yield, the parking number increased at the same rate, which has a really big impact on valuable ground floor real estate, which could otherwise be occupied by positive aspects such as deep soil planting, courtyards, or communal open space. And to mitigate this, the teams explored the use of car stackers, which have a huge spatial saving, but an equally premium cost implication, which puts more pressure on the yield. So basement schemes were also explored, which result in a more cost-effective outcome, but also a more significant outlay. So the teams were able to balance the yield to offset the increased cost, whilst retaining their design intent and sitting within the planning restrictions around mass. And the study also allowed us to explore the future use of car parking spaces in a scenario where car ownership is reduced, and plugging in things like additional apartment area, landscape reclamation, or resident amenity. So 2 more items which I'll quickly touch on, which the commercial viability influenced, were the economic whole-of-life considerations and detailing, acknowledging the brief's ambition to set a higher bar for apartment delivery. So the teams prioritised the cost benefit of their material selections to increase the sustainable and social value of their schemes where they could be deployed with maximum effect, and to assist the residents' ongoing wellbeing over the building's lifespan. Even more tangibly, the teams produced a series of plan and section design details in collaboration with our full consultant team and our developers to provide a level of quality expectation and the intent for potential adapters to adopt. They were designed to be structurally flexible, and to allow for as yet unknown building technology that could be applied without losing intent. And the last thing to acknowledge on this page is, whilst the commercial viability testing focused on build-to-sell models, which considers land purchase and other quite significant expenses, there are alternative delivery models with different priorities and sometimes without that burden of land acquisition, such as social housing and public housing. There are also alternative procurement models, such as housing collectives, build-to-rent, and not-for-profit organisations that we've explored that would shift that viability needle in a much more positive direction. So the intent of Future Homes is to really provide an alternative model to the townhouse model with more density in competitive suburbs and therefore more homes for people to live, with the acknowledgement that they can be slightly more costly and present additional risk to early adopters. So moving on to orientation, through the process, we tested the exemplars to different scenarios and documented those iterations. So the key was to focus on the key principles and design moves that introduce a level of flexibility into the planning. So you can see here the north-south orientations with grade and basement and the east-west. And the architects remain dedicated to the pursuit of good orientation and daylight penetration, no matter the challenges of the site, and the retention, in this case, of their communal courtyard, the threshold stair, and the sense of communal participation and surveillance. And what we want to demonstrate is that Future Homes is not dedicated to a fixed outcome, but it's rather an approach to quality design principles. What's also important to communicate is that Future Homes emphasises an integrated approach to landscape and architecture. So whilst different for each exemplar, the landscape and communal outdoor space strategies are all intrinsic to the generation of the designs. And the key objectives for the site are informed by opportunities for well-located deep soil planting, canopy cover, and solar access to support really high-quality green space. And the connection to the ground plane for pedestrians is critical to avoid the dominance of the car. So our landscape consultant Glass collaborated with the teams to produce a series of template diagrams, which you can see, providing a framework for adaptations to adopt, considering their own site conditions, microclimates, and different planting strategies and neighbourhood context. So digging a bit deeper on this page into the landscape section of the Future Homes guide, you can see the flexible and varied planting ground cover strategies across different aspects of the landscape applied to the open and in-between spaces between buildings and their really key micro conditions. And the focus is always on the user's connection to nature and their sort of delight when navigating to the front door of their homes. We also integrated water-sensitive urban design strategies to integrate some really key sustainable and socially valuable elements into Future Homes. And just to expand a wee bit more on the emphasis on the happiness and well-being of residents, it's worth speaking to some of the livable and enduring qualities of communal space. So the schemes have an emphasis on visual and physical permeability, which are views towards landscaped or planted areas, increased light penetration through voids, and a balance of privacy and safety with active and passive surveillance. And acoustic privacy is also considered in the guide along busier roads. The communal areas and circulation incorporate robust materials, covered walkways, productive planters, climbers, to make the transition from the street and the journey to the front door through the site a really social and safe experience. And also adequate dimensions such as space to pass, space to interact and play are also really intrinsic, along with access to light, sun and fresh air. So one of the principles of Future Homes is its neighbourhood integration, or its respect for neighbours' amenity and the enrichment of the street and surrounding public realm. So it's worth reiterating that the exemplar designs are site adaptable and their massing and strategies shift depending on local sensitive interfaces, the prevailing street conditions, overshadowing and things like that. So we aimed for positive street presence and built-in flexibility to acknowledge existing neighbourhood character without replicating it. The focus was on identifying opportunities to prioritise the pedestrian, for example, limiting the designs to a single crossover, increasing the sense of address at each home, passive surveillance, which I mentioned, and considered stagging and articulated setbacks. These tools also soften the street interface and maximise planting at both street and neighbourhood boundary. So retaining the equitable neighbourhood development opportunities, which is really crucial, their access to light and prevention of overlooking. So they're key considerations to encourage neighbourhood acceptance of the Future Homes scheme. So this carries on to overlooking strategies. And so the brief really encouraged innovative ways to mitigate overlooking without relying on screening and highlight windows. Some of the ways the teams approached that were to combine the idea of privacy with enjoyment and function, such as butterfly windows, which you can see in the top left, that orient the view away from sensitive interfaces and provide a north-facing light reflector that doubles as a nook or a seat. Other solutions include panda boxes that direct views over sensitive interfaces and pulling away from sensitive adjacencies and providing more opportunities for planting or communal space. So I'll pass back to Matt now to talk about sustainability.
Thanks, Jack. And I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'll try and make this pretty speedy. So Future Homes are designed to be both good for people, but also good for the planet. We know that better performing buildings are healthier, more comfortable, and they cost less for people to run and maintain over time. As part of the Future Homes provision, we have mandatory sustainability commitments and performance targets that are embedded in the exemplar designs in the program. And these demonstrate how apartment living can exceed current building code requirements and be zero carbon ready. Specific guidance in the form of detailed sustainability checklists and a template sustainability management plan will accompany the designs to aid adaptation. Next slide, please, Jack. So the high bar set for by the sustainability brief, specifically the requirements around 100% natural cross ventilation, high levels of daylight and 3 hours of sunlight to the living rooms in winter provided some serious challenges in the resolution of the apartments. The architects responded to these challenges in an iterative fashion, working in a variety of ways, and it was a true collaboration with the ESD consultants, WSP. With outcomes tested and proven by daylight modelling and heating and cooling calculations, other technical analysis and data will be made available with the plans to demonstrate how they achieve the desired outcomes stated in the brief. The results of the processes are designs that are nearly all north-facing in terms of the living rooms, provide multiple daylight sources, and all schemes incorporating open circulation to facilitate increased ventilation and encourage active circulation and connect with spaces to play and socialise outside. Next slide, please, Jack. So an integrated approach to the architecture, landscape, services and structure supports the opportunity for the exemplar designs to adapt and evolve over time. While the designs are structurally agnostic, they have been developed with serious consideration of construction efficiency, cost effectiveness, and practical detailing to embed the design intent and enhance building performance requirements. Repeated elements of windows, bathrooms and kitchens, conventional structural spans, and standard material modules assist with minimising waste and maximising functional space and build quality. Opportunities for prefabrication have been encouraged, and we see this as a key next area of deeper investigation for the Future Homes program. Next slide, please. So the plans here on screen show 4 ways a 2-bedroom apartment of exemplar D might be configured to suit site opportunities, brief requirements, aspects such as access to views, bedroom separation, different locations of associated outdoor space. They also show the degree to which the designs anticipate ageing in place and accessibility exceeding the current apartment design guidelines and consistent with the core elements of the livable housing design guidelines. Considerations include increased provisions for dining areas, increased workable bench space in kitchens, provisions for baths and dedicated laundry troughs in apartments with 2 or more bedrooms, and separating toilets in larger 3-bedroom apartments. The selection of apartment plans shown here on screen is just some of the many different offerings provided across the different development typologies of the various exemplars. The apartments vary in size, arrangement, and some over multiple levels. So the section on the bottom of the screen shows one scheme that provides for single-level apartments, 2-storey apartments, as well as a hybrid sort of townhouse model of 3-level apartments straddling the car parking. A primary focus has been to set up spaces with good amenity, good access to light, views and acoustics so that they can work in multiple ways. One space might be a space to play at one moment, a space for study or work at another, or a place for exercise. All layouts show a commitment to maximising the northern orientation, providing a minimum of dual aspect, often multiple aspect, and a direct relationship to the ground and outdoor space and landscape, even when at upper levels. Sorry, I just had a bit of an issue there. So the next 3 plans on screen show the ground floor plan for the same apartment, which could be potentially a 2 or 3-level apartment, and it illustrates the degree to which we've tried to provide guidance and inspiration for adapting the designs and allowing them to be applied in flexible ways to suit different briefs. The layouts on screen show a possible dual key arrangement, a separate quarter for intergenerational living, or a home office setup. The next section, I just wanted to touch a bit on materials. So a key principle of future homes is the employment of systems and materials that minimise the building's initial carbon input and the need for ongoing care and maintenance to keep them in good order. But equally important is fostering a sense of pride and place in home, acknowledging the existing character of the area, but also anticipating the future character. A range of materials and finishes have been nominated for each exemplar that inspire delight and provide flexibility to endure. The support and application and translation of the different materials is guided by detailed project schedules. These schedules provide design guidance on the original intent, but also guidance on the criteria for substitution. And this serves 2 purposes. One is to guide the design hand that's actually undertaking the adaptation, but also to guide those that are assessing it. So to support that, design intent facade details are another critical tool that are used for communicating the approach and expectations for the assembly of materials and structure in relation to expectations of design quality, building performance and longevity. So Homes Victoria, we're pretty Victoria will be the first demonstration project, which exemplifies the government's commitment to the Future Homes project in realising a first built outcome. So while the Future Homes design brief in this instance, our core brief for the program is generally well aligned with Homes Victoria standard briefs, this particular demonstration project required some really specific accessibility provisions, as well as all apartments being single level, which was not in alignment with our base exemplar designs. But also it allowed for a reduced parking rate of 0.6 cars per dwelling. So this allows for opportunities that weren't necessarily anticipated. But really what it shows is that the shift across the three versions on your screen, which shows the competition screen, the exemplar and the demonstration project, it demonstrates the retention of the key design moves and principles that acknowledges supporting great amenity outcomes. So Jack, next slide. We might just skip because I'm conscious that we are quite behind time, so we can skip. There's just some additional imagery there showing how the materiality has been translated in the demonstration project.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay, Matt.
Oh, sorry about that.
So what became clear and a few learnings that we had throughout the Future Homes process is that it's a really challenging mid-scale development. It sits in between the scales of your typical domestic townhouses and a more commercial construction, which has an increase in complexity and risk and uncertainty for contractors at that scale, and also some inherent planning issues. So also the development model, viability challenges exist at every level, starting with the cost of land and across every trade, from the structural approach, parking, materials and detailing, which did lead to the exploration of a number of different alternative development models, all of which have unique limitations and opportunities, whether they focus on profit, whether they focus on risk or retention and holding. And there's a definite level of complexity when you compare it with that townhouse typology. And one thing that we learned was early integration and prioritization of the landscape was really crucial to inform the site response, to retain those areas for deep soil and canopy covers, and also how the impact of cars and that 1-to-1 ratio, even though it's a discount, also provides some significant spatial challenges, which we had a really rigorous interrogation of.
Yes, there were also some really serious tensions between the ambitions for great levels of sunlight and daylight and natural ventilation, in that it has some significant impacts on the floor to wall ratio, which is a challenge in keeping the costs of the building down and producing some really economical structures. There were also some tensions in between code compliance around flammability and ambitions for using natural materials, location of openings for surveillance and ventilation, as well as landscape facades. But we do see some real opportunities in alternative forms of construction, being able to deliver higher quality, better performing, and hopefully more affordable buildings using offsite construction or hybrid models. So we'll now hand over to Amy, who hopefully has some time to talk through the planning considerations.
Thanks, Matt and Jack. Okay, let me try whip through this in the remaining time that we have. So Jack and Matt has just taken you through the issue of viability and the amount of work that's gone into making each of our exemplar designs stand a chance out in the real world. We've also been very mindful that viable, high-quality designs won't necessarily get the take-up if there isn't a program or a process in place to facilitate their use. And so whatever process we create, it also needed to balance the competing interests of all players involved. We had to find that right balance between making plans attractive, ensuring that there was going to be some time and monetary savings for those that were part of the process, making sure the planning and the quality design outcomes weren't lost or watered down through whatever process we created, and ensuring adequate community participation. So to implement Future Homes, we're currently in the middle of creating a brand new streamlined planning process This is the incentive for people to take up the exemplar designs. This will be done through front-loading the design and planning assessment, so doing all of the heavy lifting upfront through the creation of a new particular provision introduced into the planning scheme of our pilot councils. And we're deliberately implementing this through a pilot program with 3 councils, so we can really test and iron out any issues before a broader program rollout. While there's still a lot of consultation that needs to occur with our pilot councils, it's fair to say that there will be significant time savings achieved under this new process. It will be bold, and it's set to reduce the usual planning timeframes by more than half if an adaptation has been undertaken successfully. And who measures the successfulness of an adaptation? This design integrity check will be done by embedding the design profession into the planning process. This is something we've heard from industry for quite some time now. Jack, if we can just stay on that previous slide, sorry. So like I said, this is something that we've heard from the design industry for quite some time now, that they'd like to see the design professions involved in the decision-making process. And while some may see this as an extra step, we feel it's a very important step to ensuring the integrity of the adaptation, and the integrity and the aspirations of future homes are diminished. And even with this independent design integrity check, we calculate that the process being a 4 to 5 month process for an approval, and that's from the purchase of an exemplar design all the way through to the permit being issued by council. However, in return for this certainty and the time savings, we're also raising the bar and introducing a new specific future homes planning provision for all developments that use the exemplar designs. This provision will include 13 mandatory requirements, and these 13 requirements have already been embedded into all of our exemplar designs. And these requirements will ensure that we can really deliver on the high quality, livability and sustainability outcomes that the Premier announced back in 2018. So these include things such as bicycle parking, ESD, ageing in place, communal open space, car parking, internal layouts, circulations, and so forth. And not only are these mandatory, but a number of these requirements actually go above and beyond what the current planning scheme says, therefore truly living up to that livability commitment. And then there's the adaptation guide, something that Jack and Cara briefly spoke to earlier. We see this as a bit of a one-stop shop for all of those who are using, designing and adapting and assessing the future homes proposals. It's the thing that actually brings the exemplar designs and the planning process together. This is a 3-part document that will guide designers and assessors through text and show them through drawings how to successfully adapt an exemplar design to different site scenarios whilst maintaining the principles and the objectives of future homes, as well as all of the relevant planning requirements being pulled into this one document. In addition to having our 4 winning design teams and technical project consultants contribute to this document, we've also had input for some of our typical referral authorities. Now, the benefit of doing this is that the typical plan requirements and standard conditions that you might receive from a referral authority, like Transport for Victoria or Melbourne Water, are now known upfront and can be included into someone's adaptation rather than post an application being lodged with the responsible authority. And we feel that this provides that added certainty. And I should also say that to provide that added certainty, these referral authorities have also committed to expediting all referrals of future homes applications they receive, another way of reducing timeframes. So where to from here? Over the coming months, we'll be consulting with our pilot councils, and we'll also be doing some targeted industry consultation on the proposed new planning process to make sure from a developer's point of view and from a designer's point of view, we haven't missed anything critical and that the program is as attractive as we feel it is. All this testing obviously needs to be done before we release the program to public for use, which we hope will be in early next year. And we're also looking into the future, so the future of future homes. So following review of this pilot program, we will be looking for broader application of future homes across Metro Melbourne and potentially into some of our regional centres as well. And just before I hand back to Stefan, Just a shout out to all the collaborators that have worked with us over the last 12 months. And you've also been taken through the beginnings of the first demonstration project we have with Homes Victoria. I guess I just want to end by saying would love to be able to build at least one of each of the 4 designs over the next 12 months. And so while we are continuing to work with Homes Victoria on potential sites, we're also open to facilitating more partnerships with other councils, social housing providers, and others who may be on the call today that might be interested in doing a Future Homes project. Thanks. Over to you, Stefan.
Thanks, Amy. And as you can see, it's been a really good collaboration between the department and ourselves, and it's been a real team effort. So thank you very much for everyone. Just to say that there are obviously tremendous other opportunities here. Matt mentioned offsite construction. The whole point of Future Homes is replication. And the economics of what we've been modeling was based on a one-off. And that could truly change if a pipeline of projects actually came into being. But there are other opportunities around partnerships, obviously public housing renewal, and so on. If you just go to the next slide, and a sneak peek, if you like, and the next slides, Jack, just to say that while we haven't tried to solve the neighbourhood renewal, we are looking at that internally. We're currently just testing how could this actually look on scale. I'm very conscious that a lot of people have done a lot of work in this space, but we would be elated if we had the opportunity to do this on scale. So with that, I think we conclude the session. Alan, I don't know if we have time to squeeze in a question. I know that Theo has sent 2 questions through.
Look, thanks, Stefan, and thanks to the whole team for a comprehensive presentation. And it's great to really see what's been going on in the background. You often just see the outcomes of these processes in the early competition brief, but it's great to see what's been going on. I mean, there has been a few questions. We are tight for time, given that we're moving to the next session very soon, but we will have an opportunity at 6:45 to pick up in the last final panel session. Stefan and Jill Garner will be joining that panel, and I'm going to capture these questions. I mean, I think just at the end there, Stefan, you touched on that upscaling across a whole neighbourhood and precinct, and that was a question Ben Thorpe had asked about, how we're actually starting to look at this across a whole neighbourhood and the kind of urban impact of it, which I think is a really important question about upscaling. Yes, I mean, Theo did post the question. Across the 3 days, we've heard a lot about post-occupancy. We heard this in the context of Flora Samuel's talk on day 1 about social value and social value toolkits. So it would be good to maybe pick this up again in an hour's time about post-occupancy and the role that might play. There's so much knowledge, I think, that's embedded in this project, and how we learn from that and build capacity around that knowledge. And it probably goes in some respects to Alan Kong's question, which was, the challenge in all of this. I mean, there's so much work and support that's gone into making and realising these prototypes. And, there's consultancy fees that we need to think about, the slightly kind of invisible aspect of trying to make this stack up for a practice. And look, there's so much incredible work around realising this. I'm sure there's been a lot of value engineering conversations going on. And again, we could probably pick that up again in an hour's time. But, that's something I think is really important to understand. How does this play out in terms of time and to realise this? But look, an incredible project. I was, I think, involved in a very early workshop a few years ago when it was an idea. It's amazing to see it coming to fruition. It's no mean feat to try and prototype and test, and it's, to get Ben Rimmer from Homes Victoria starting the whole symposium on Wednesday, talking about the fact that they're now partnering on this to realise these prototypes, I think is just fantastic. I think, interestingly, when you look at the end of day 1 and what's happening in Vienna, and I hate making these comparisons because they're very different contexts and financial models, but when you see the scale of an EBA, and 70 odd projects that are prototypes open to the public as a spectacle and as a way of really understanding how competition processes and experimentation can actually shape things. I've been involved in so many housing expos and demonstration projects in the past that have been a one-off, one experiment, and it's the most frustrating aspect of this. You never learn and you never progress if you don't continue with the process. So it's really heartening to hear that DELP and the OVGA and Homes Victoria do plan to actually continue this process and actually roll it out. So it's a great experimentation that we can only learn from. So thank you all. Importantly, we are about to move. We have been all over the world over the last few days. You know, after trips to Los Angeles today and to Berlin, we now find ourselves travelling to Copenhagen for our final keynote. And so please join me in the next session with Nord Copenhagen, and we'll hear about another type of experimentation that's going on over there, and quite an ambitious project, which is prototyping a very particular scale. So thank you once again, and I'll see you in a second.